Good morning or good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone. Thanks for joining.
While we wait, would love to hear where everyone's zooming in from. If you want to drop your location in the chat. All of us are in Seattle currently.
Yeah, thanks so much everyone for joining and welcome. We're super excited to have everyone here today. And as Megan mentioned, as we wait for others to trickle in, feel free to let us know in the chat where you're zooming in from.
Ooh, San Diego, Sienna.
I love it. I'm from San Diego.
We'll definitely keep things quick and conversational today, and then we'll also make sure to save some time at the end for our live Q&A with Rob. So if any questions pop into your head while we're discussing, feel free to throw them in the chat at any time.
All right, Megan, what do you think? We'll give everyone a couple more minutes.
Yes. People probably grabbing their lunch and sitting down to watch.
Yeah, Rob, what are you gonna have for lunch today?
I actually forgot to get in on the lunch order train here in the office. So I have no lunch plan. Nobody's coming to save me. I'll have to figure it out after this.
If it makes you feel better, I honestly don't remember what I ordered, so
I never do it.
it's always a surprise. Looks like we've got a couple more people trickling in.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. I'm sure as we get going, people will roll in as they can, as they're grabbing their coffee and sitting down with lunch. Thanks so much for all of you that have joined today. We're super excited. We're joined today by our co-founder and Chief Technology Officer, Rob Williams, and we'll be talking about a huge shift happening in technology right now, agentic AI and how it's changing the way that work gets done.
Rob, before we dive in, do you want to do a quick introduction of yourself and share a little bit about your background?
Sure. Happy to be here today. Thanks for having me. So my name's Rob, as I mentioned. I co-founded Reed about 4 years ago now. My background is a mix of big tech and startup life. So I spent a number of years working at Microsoft, but also worked in location analytics startups. One was acquired by Snapchat. Spent time at Foursquare as well. And then my formal background, I've got degrees in computer engineering and computational physics. So that's like the last 20 years of my life in 30 seconds. And obviously, we'll be talking about the most recent 4 years here at Reed, where most of my day-to-day is basically product development, strategy, planning, things like that at the high level. But I am definitely an engineer at heart and definitely helped build a lot of the early versions of what we have built upon today.
Love it. Thanks so much, Rob. Okay, well, let's set the stage for today's chat. This is really about how agentic AI is reshaping the workplace and how you have led through that shift to your points earlier. Megan, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, let's just start from the top. Rob, do you want to walk us through like what agentic AI actually is and how it's different from traditional automation or typical AI tools?
Yeah. So what is agentic AI? It is, I'd say a couple of things. One is it's a buzzword that gets used, I think, a little bit too often. But what it is actually under the covers is, I think, a really important distinction versus what we had all been doing and seeing previously, even within the last few years. So as opposed to the traditional AI and the interactions and the interfaces with some very advanced, sophisticated systems and language models where you might ask a question, you might get an answer. There's a lot that goes on there to make it present in a human-like way, and there's a lot of intelligence that goes into that. Agentic is a little bit different in that there are some key capabilities that are going on behind the scenes. And so the distinguishing aspect there versus the classic interactive or classic mechanical automation systems is that these agentic systems can reason about what they're going to do and why they need to do it. And they can even tell you why they believe that they need to do it. Through that, they can plan an approach. They can tell you the plan that they're going to take. They can take feedback from you about that plan. And so in that sense, you can really have a collaborative partner throughout the reasoning process. And then, of course, they can take not just what they're doing in the current context, but they can remember what you might have done with them previously. They can learn from it. They can learn from behaviors that you've done. And you have this kind of always on reasoning agent that's there for you and can complete tasks without your having to go specifically engage it, specifically ask a question, tell it what you need, and have a more transactional relationship. It's much more of that always on.
Interesting. And this might be an obvious question to your recent response, but why does agentic AI matter?
Yeah. Well, I think it matters if you think through the lens, not just of building technology for technology's sake, but what are the kinds of things that we can get out of it, and what are the kinds of things that you can do that are different with it versus other traditional methods. One of the biggest arguments that I see, and personally my favorite angle, is agentic approaches that are always on and are thinking on your behalf and working with you. I think are going to have a much bigger impact on things like time savings, the way that humans choose to spend their time. It doesn't mean these systems are going to replace the high level things that we're doing. They're not, I'm not really a proponent of they're coming for your jobs mindset, but I do think it's the case that they can be taking a lot of things off of your plate and then presenting the end result to you so that you can make the higher level decision and you get less bogged down, right? They're not going to get fatigued. They're not sitting here as we were wondering what's going to be for lunch today. They can really sift through a lot more. And I'm a firm believer, I've said this to many people over the years, that information workers today, sort of slowly over the last 30 years, I think we've gotten to a place where we're concretely awash with more information and more going on than we can reasonably keep track of. And I feel like the more and more I've adopted tools to augment my workflows, the more I've realized just how much I, actually was dropping the ball before, or, might not have been dedicating all the time that I could have for some important things. And so I think going forward, augmenting our workflows with agentic processes is really about saving time, being thorough, and enhancing what we are already trying to do or wanting to do, and just having a higher quality output.
I love that. So I guess on that point as well, where do you see agentic AI going over like the next year or two, and what should like tech leaders be preparing for?
Yeah, so I often think about, and I talk to my team, and when we're rolling something out, I think in terms of a crawl, walk, run phase. So we have to crawl before we can walk, before we can run. So what we're seeing now, and what I think you can expect to see in the near future, by which of course I mean like what I know Reed is releasing in the near future, you're going to see some scenarios start to light up. And so we can take a number of things off of your plate. The agentic system can, for instance, use your Salesforce instance or your sales team's Salesforce instance or HubSpot instance and start to understand what patterns emerge and reason about what should be done. And so these will look like agents that, following a call with a client or a prospect, they'll recommend that the deal probability gets changed, or the deal state gets advanced, or you'll get nudged to say this deal actually didn't pan out and we should close it, things like that. That's in this crawl early phase that we're in, where it really will be looking at what you're doing, looking at what you have done in the past, figuring out what likely needs to happen or what you would have done, and making that nudge and that suggestion for you. And that's going to be a way to get people comfortable with that collaboration aspect of agentic. So you won't see it running amok and making decisions, and you won't have to go scold it or chastise it. It will just be providing these helpful probes or moments when you maybe get distracted and don't do all the paperwork that you need to do, things like that. So it'll start to take those rote tasks off your plate. Over time, I think it's going to be a really neat cycle when we start to look out 3, 6, 12 months. we start to go from crawling to walking to running, you're going to see things like proactive combing through all of the one-on-ones that you've had over the last year, or all of the documents that you have internally, and saying, actually, this person, you've given this feedback over these periods of time. Maybe they're doing really, really well. Performance reviews are coming up. I think you should deliver this feedback one more time, or I think you should double tap on it. And really, in that sense, it's almost like a safety net where it can be operating a little bit more independently. It can be proactive and observing what's going on in your company, what might be coming up, and it's still not, to be clear, making all those decisions. I don't necessarily think it's appropriate for these systems to be like judging employee performance, but I think it can provide a lot of the relief from time-consuming aspects. And so it'll really start to go out and proactively say, I think it would be helpful if I went and combed through all this and aggregated the feedback, or compared these, the job description that we have for an opening to the skill set of the people that we're interviewing, who actually we do end up hiring. And maybe there's a discrepancy there and we need to go update our HR system, things like that. So it'll get slowly more complex, slowly more automated. But I think in the early stages, it's good to just get acclimated with it.
It's super helpful context and a helpful distinguishment between the two. I think moving on from that, for those of you all that don't know, a lot of the reason why we wanted to host today's webinar is because Rob recently released his version of an IT leader's playbook. And it's all about turning this insight into actionability. So let's try to shift the conversation a little bit more into turning this into action. Rob, you've built this playbook to help leaders start building out their strategy. What's step one, and where should teams begin with agentic AI?
Yes. So one of the biggest reasons I did that actually is because step one wasn't happening enough. And I think it's by far the most important, which is just start early in having conversations with your internal teams. And so what that looks like for IT leaders specifically, and I don't know how many people here today are in that category, but it means being open about what your company's philosophy and plan is toward adopting new tools, and where you are in that process. So that even if you don't have a concrete plan, they know that something is happening. They understand that somebody's looking at it, because in absence of that communication and that early engagement with employees, people will just start to go off on their own. They'll start to identify tools or solutions that might look like they solve their own problems or needs. And then the IT leaders are put in a position of having perhaps an organization that's got 100 different tools that are being used, with 100 different stances on security and different policies on retention and things like that. So I think that by far the most important first step is to start to have those conversations, start to figure out what people's needs are, and that'll help you drive the subsequent steps, which I'm happy to go into as well.
Awesome. And since you were touching on it, and employees bringing in tools without leadership knowing, and we hear a lot about shadow AI now, what's your advice on how to work with that and not against it?
Yeah, I think so. Once you've had that first conversation, or broadcast within your organization that this is a thing, it's not going to go away, we're not ignoring it. I really do think it's that second piece of getting input. Figure out what people's motivations are for using it. Figure out what problems they're trying to solve internally, and figure out if there's a way that you can sort of take the input from different areas of the team and organization to meet some higher level goals. Because often there's certain low level needs within sales organizations, or a separate set of needs within product development. And then if you go to the leaders across those teams and you ask them, then there would be an overarching set of needs that might glue them together. So it's really a standard sort of classic. Figure out what pain points are happening within your organization and use that to drive the steps 3, 4, 5, and 6, as opposed to trying to do it all in a vacuum.
Yeah, there's not no one way to go about it. Once you get those leaders on board, though, you talk about managing high level expectations and pain points. Once you get those leaders on board, how do they actually set measurable goals for success?
Yeah, I try. So when I'm talking to people about their expectations, I like to be super upfront, because I certainly don't want people with mistaken impressions using my product and being disappointed in it. I like to try to be really, really concrete about what they want to see. And often I try to get people to frame things in terms of verbs instead of nouns. And so rather than just say, we want to have summaries of our meetings, totally reasonable thing. I want to know what verbs they want to do with it. Do you want to be able to share these with your internal employees? Do you want people to be able to chat with it and get answers to their questions during onboarding? Do you want it to be something that like individual users choose what data goes into? Do you want to be the ones who are deciding that? Really get into the actions of the scenarios that are going to be behind it. Because I think if you take the noun approach of just feature checklists, let's imagine you make a checklist that has a row for every feature and a column for every company you're evaluating, and you fill it all in, and everything looks really, really similar. You're going to miss the fact that different products are built with different goals in mind or coming from different philosophies. Reed, personally, I'm biased toward it, but I can tell you that Reed is built with a bias toward heterogeneous data. We're not living in one kingdom or one castle. Some companies are. Maybe your company uses only Microsoft tools and data, things like that. But for Reed, we focus on heterogeneous data. We focus on sharing. We focus on choice at the individual user level. And I think that kind of thing is a really big aspect to consider. I won't say that there's a right or a wrong answer, even with my bias, but I think it's important to think about what you want people to be doing or not doing, and evaluate the tools through that lens.
Great.
Yeah, that's really great. And this is kind of going to touch on the same thing, but besides maybe just those feature requests that leaders are looking for, what else do you think is most important when they're evaluating tools, whether it be Read or other AI tools?
I think it's really important to recognize that I'll say almost always, because I don't like to say always. It's almost always the case that within an organization, employees are approaching tools and the space as a whole with very different levels of comfort, levels of understanding, levels of interest, levels of sophistication. That's one of the reasons I said, Read, again, I'm biased, but Read, we focus on letting the individual users decide whether or not to connect their calendar or decide whether or not to connect their email or their Slack or Confluence or Salesforce, whatever the case may be. You choose what data you want to bring. You choose which meetings you want to record. I think that's really important because some people are gung-ho and they fully, maybe they've done the shadow IT thing and evaluated 100 products. They know exactly what they want. They know where the value is. They're going to dive right in. Other people might either not be comfortable with it, not know quite how to use it, and they need to go through a similar crawl, walk, run phase to be sure that they're seeing the value and not just getting lost in that process. So I'd say understanding people are coming from a different place with it is a really, really good idea for anyone setting policy at the company level.
Perfect. And to put a big bow on this and wrap it up, kind of like the final question on this note, what is the best way to make that business case for agentic AI? For example, like how do you get buy-in
Yeah.
around trust, security, and ROI?
Yeah, one of the things that I think about, this is going to be a little bit of a tangential answer to that, but I promise I'll get there. I think it's really easy to defer or delay adopting it until you see what use cases emerge in other companies, maybe competitors or what is happening in industry. I go back to there's that age-old quote about the best time to plant a tree, where the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago and the second best time is now. I think that's true with agentic AI. I think if you wait a year to try it out or to work to put together a plan, then a year from now, you're going to wish you had a year of data and meetings and one-on-ones. A year from now, you're going to wish that you weren't having to comb through your manual notes to figure out what performance reviews are going to look like, things like that. So I do think that when going through the planning and the approval process, it's important for people to be looking at the opportunity cost of waiting. Not just what scenarios exist today, but like think a little bit ahead and think about what are the pain points in your job. Even if Reed doesn't do it today necessarily, even if we don't solve it through some of the agentic functionality we're making available today and next month, think about how likely is it that that's going to be available? And how helpful would it be if a new hire in a year had access to all of this history? When a new hire starts at Reed, we've got thousands of hours of content that they can just interact with, and it's wonderful. And 3 years ago, I didn't predict that. I hadn't wrapped my head around it, but I do think that getting started is one of the important aspects, and I think that there's a cost to not. So I'd encourage that to be part of the conversation when going through approvals and thinking about the timing.
As a newer hire, I can definitely back that up. It's very helpful.
Well,
But
it's easy to, you can ask 1,000 questions of an agentic system, and you can have it pointing things out, and it won't be annoyed with you as a new hire. I wish I had it when I was starting my first job, years ago, and I could have overcome the embarrassment of having to ask 1,000 things that I thought were obvious to others.
it's really
Me
helpful.
every time I have a product question, going to Search Copilot.
Totally. Yeah.
But I guess that's actually a good shift because now you can bring in a little bit more of your bias and talk about how Read ties into all of this. So with that, how is Read designed with agentic AI in mind?
Yeah. So I think the fact that we're so focused on heterogeneous data means that we're able to do some really, really neat things. We're able to bring together what used to be totally disparate sources of information. Your email and your Slack maybe had no connection or never were related to your HubSpot CRM or anything like that. But it means that we are building quite rapidly, and it's going to continue to speed up as the pace of technology just continues to accelerate. We're building tools that connect all of these things in ways that we didn't predict in the past. And so, if you're an engineering team and you're talking about an issue that impacts one significant customer, there's no reason why the account manager who's responsible for that customer shouldn't get a small bite-sized alert saying, hey, just so you know, this is going on, things like that. So I think Read's the right spot for people who are living in multiple worlds, for companies who have multiple disciplines, so that it's not just restricted to sales or engineering. And personally, I prefer the approach of everybody bringing and connecting their own data sources, and so that's my Read centric vote. I of course it's aligned with the kinds of things I would want, because I was here since the beginning, but I also think that it's a good way to do it, and I think it's the right approach in this world, like I described, where people have different levels of sophistication or comfort with it.
Perfect. I was just about to ask if you had a quick example of how teams are using Read today, but you already offered a couple. Can you just elaborate on the real world impact they're seeing? You gave an example of like cross-team collaboration. So what's the
Yeah.
real world impact of that for you?
Yeah, so I've got many different engineering teams underneath me. There was a day when I realized, of course, every engineering team really should have available to it the content from the other engineering teams' planning meetings, right? This is not a private one-on-one or something sensitive. And so we were able to set up our organization structure within Read with these teams, and a back-end engineering team who is building something that a front-end engineering team is going to need. All of this data is just available. You don't have to know that it exists, but you can easily, if you're a front-end engineer, ask what the API is going to look like to for something that's a feature you're building out, and you'll just get all of this wealth of knowledge without having to explicitly go in and click share or do any number of manual actions. These are things that we, even today, I'll wake up and say, oh my gosh, of course, we could just do that. And that makes total sense. And I have no idea why all of this information was siloed before. But that's a good example, I think, on the engineering team, of how it works. And, we're continuing to come up with more, and I'm happy to write more about it in the future as we do.
Great.
I love that. And I'm assuming we have a few people here from some IT or security teams. So I think a big question that we have is, how does Read make sure we're handling data safely while still being useful?
Yeah. So going back to the, everybody can decide what data to bring. We allow the users the control of what data they're choosing to bring. We also allow administrators the control of what data they want to bring into the system, what lifecycle and retention policies apply to it. We, of course, have always on third-party penetration testing and go through third-party audits and things like that. But we try to make it as conveniently configurable as possible so that you can choose what you're comfortable with, because everybody's got different levels of data. And we've got clients, from individual solo entrepreneurs up to HIPAA compliant organizations that have really strict needs on safeguards and regulations and tracking and things like that. So we cover the full spectrum. We try to do it in a way that's as self-serve as possible. Wherever it's not fully self-service, it's just a support ticket away. And we've got a great support team who'll get back to you too.
Perfect. That's a great question to kick us off, Megan. I think we can now shift into our question and answer section of today's webinar. So let's open it up. For all of you that are attending, we'd love if you could drop anything that you're curious about into the question and answer function of Zoom or just straight into the chat, and we'll get through as many as we can today.
And while we wait, I actually have a question for you, Rob. What's one common mistake you see companies make when they start exploring AI?
I think, I mean, not to beat a dead horse, I think it's not really having a plan. I've been at conferences where I've heard someone say things like, "Oh, we're trying Microsoft Copilot," and I'll say, "Okay, great. For what?" And they're like, "Well, what do you mean? We're trying it." And it's but for what? So I think that setting it up without a clear, measurable goal is going to leave you at the end of a trial with some company, and it could even be Reed. It's not specific to our competitors. It's going to leave you at the end of this process not really sure whether you got what you wanted because you weren't sure. And I think something people do as well, and I always try to like facilitate this conversation when I'm involved in the sales process with some strategic clients, is help them think about examples or the kinds of things that they might not yet have thought about within their organization. I can draw on my own personal experience, but really trying to get concrete. And if you aren't concrete in what you want, just ask. So I think it's absolutely the case that people at Reed are happy to help you. So if you're talking to one of our account managers or sellers, just ask. You don't have to know all the answers. They've got a lot of experience that you can draw on as well.
Thanks, Rob. You touched on, for example, like performance reviews earlier, and even how maybe like Reed has been impacting your interview processes. So I have a question for you too. I'm curious, how do you see agentic AI changing how teams are structured or even how companies hire?
That's a really good question. So I think on the hiring front, there's one angle to it, which is just pure efficiency. Not because we're going to let AI make hiring decisions for us. I think that would be a mistake. But because information is so much easier to share with each other within a company. And so we can have a candidate who applies for one role, and maybe a recruiter has an initial conversation with them. We can have our system understand, and we've created some preset rules and triggers and prompts to try to guide the model because we're in early days, but have it understand that maybe this is a candidate who's best suited for this other team who never saw their resume. And we can really get some flexibility on routing the right person to the right spot, which at the end of the day improves hiring velocity. It'll get them here sooner. And then right after that, it's going to do the onboarding benefits that I described. So it really does help with that 0 to fully ramped up employee cycle. I think from an org structure perspective, it's never a bad thing to think about your data inventory and what data should be shared. Because if you've got teams that you think obviously there should be no siloed information between these two, sort of like some neighboring engineering teams, in examples I gave, it might make you think about whether or not they should actually be under the same director, or maybe they should be related in some other way. So I do think that it's a useful exercise just to think about the actual functioning of the company.
Great.
Great. We do have a couple questions, or a couple more questions as well. So one that we have is, how do you minimize scope creep in the I'm going to mess up that word.
Do you want to message
LLMs?
it?
Yeah. Whoa. Sienna, unless you want to take it, because my brain's not working apparently.
How do you minimize scope creep in the discontinuous LLMs?
Oh, okay, there we go.
Is this I guess there are a few different angles I could address that. I want to be sure that I'm understanding the question. From a philosophical, from a technical building perspective, my team will tell you that I'm a huge advocate for composable systems with really, really intentional targets of functionality. And so I don't come at building a product like Reed thinking, wow, we need this mega model that's crazy expensive to train and it's going to do absolutely everything. I think that's a really great way to get yourself into a hard to maintain and iterate and improve world, because any change could destabilize any other aspect of the product. So I try to focus on we've got an ensemble of many models and many methodologies. What are the key performance and health indicators of each of those, and which ones need tune-ups from time to time? And go have our research team focus on those. And as long as you monotonically improve the performance and the health metrics of a particular piece, you'll be improving the performance of the system as a whole if it's truly built using composable building blocks. It's kind of, all the way back to the foundations of Unix and the way that Unix was built. But I won't go into that today.
Perfect. Let's do one more question and see if I can read this time. Can we set a data retention policy for our organization to meet our regulatory requirements? So assuming this is for read.
Yes. So this was one of the fascinating things that when we built Read, I knew that at some point we'd need data retention rules and things. We built that out. We had the sort of standard requests that you'd expect of 1 year or 2 years, even 6 months, just to make sure that there's true destruction of data. The shortest that we have is a week. So some people are on really tight, highly regulated timescales, but it's still incredibly valuable to them, even just to have that window of data. At the very least, you can come back from vacation and ask what you missed and get a truly great write-up on it. So short answer is yes. Long answer is people are all over the place on what they want there, but we support it all.
Awesome. Well, I think if that's all the questions we have, then that's a wrap. We are giving away a free year read, so congratulations, Mike Williams. We will follow up with you via email. But just want to give a huge thank you to Rob for walking us through everything today, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you so much, Rob. Everyone take care.
Thanks, Sienna and Megan. Appreciate it.
Bye, Rob.